The ancient civilizations of America were unique, and their history been mostly passed down through oral history. But there's some physical evidence that we can examine. The remnants of these lost ancient American civilizations can still be seen if you look hard enough. Chaco Culture National Historic Park preserves a major prehistoric center of ceremony and trade in the San Juan Basin, just south of Farmington, New Mexico. Natural beauty and cultural significance meet in this area of northwestern New Mexico, where ruins, artifacts, and other archaeological sites radiate from Chaco Canyon's cultural epicenter. Around 200 AD, the first farmers settled in what is now Chaco, using agriculture to supplement hunting and gathering, and building small pit houses on the mesa for shelter. This era of early Pueblo culture lasted more than a half-century until drastic changes in the complexity and scale of building construction changed the face of both the culture and the landscape. For 300 years, this latest version of Pueblo culture, coined Anastasi, flourished, constructing impressive buildings and roads throughout Greater Chaco region, with Chaco Canyon as the epicenter. And then they vanished, abandoning Chaco Canyon around 1150 AD. There are many ideas about the cause of this sudden exodus, including prolonged drought, but the likely complex reasons for this exodus remain a mystery. Amazing building skills are what most define the Chaco culture. Massive great houses are a significant divergence from traditional Pueblo settlements. Great houses are unusually large, multi-story masonry buildings made of stacked stone, usually sandstone, and mortar. In addition to their size, highly refined masonry techniques and advanced engineering make these structures truly spectacular, featuring hundreds of rooms, some very large, and several circular kivas built within the main structure. In traditional Pueblo domestic settlements, kivas were in a central plaza. Each great house also had a separate great kiva nearby. Over 200 outlying Chacoan great houses exist in the greater Chaco region, with a bit of mystery still surrounding their purpose. Some believe they served as the center for massive settlements, while others imagine them as trade centers or ceremonial developments. Chacoan roads are another defining aspect of the Chaco culture. An elaborate road system served to connect great houses and significant landscape features across the greater Chaco region. There are over 100 miles of prehistoric roads associated with Chaco, some of which can still be traced today. Like Chacoan great houses, these roads were massive and built with an elevated level of engineering skill. They were also remarkably linear. While most roads and trails contour with the landscape, Chacoan roads follow direct lines to a destination, often going over rather than contouring around major landscape features and taking angular bends instead of gentle curves. Some of these roads extended for miles in a single direction. Chaco culture was intimately linked to the stars. The Chacoan people were expert skywatchers with a strong connection between celestial events and daily life. This connection to the stars is evident in the architecture of the great houses, where architectural features are aligned with significant astronomical events. Similar alignments are found in observational and ceremonial sites throughout the greater Chaco region. With astronomy as a center point of culture, dark night skies were an integral component of Chacoan life. This feature is largely preserved today, as the night sky of the greater Chaco region remains one of the most unpolluted in the U.S. The Mystery Hill archaeological site, better known today as America's Stonehenge, is situated on the exposed bedrock summit of Mystery Hill in North Salem, New Hampshire. The site consists of a core complex of 13 stone chambers, several enclosures, niches, stone walls, stone-lined drains, small grooves and basins, and other features which covers about 1 acre on the summit. Extending outward from and surrounding the core complex are more stone walls, niches, standing stones, and 2 procession ways. Along the perimeter of the summit are 4 confirmed astronomical alignments. Below the summit on the slopes of the hill are a 14th chamber, 2 utilized natural caves, springs, stone walls, stone cairns, niches, standing stones, and other features. In total, the site covers about 105 acres. America's Stonehenge stands out among other related sites because it's arguably the most complex, sophisticated, and visually impressive of all the known stone structure sites in northeastern U.S. An impressive number of carbon-14 dates has been obtained from charcoal samples found during excavations at the site. These dates range from 7,000 years ago to as recent as 200 years ago. The earliest C14 date, which is directly linked to construction activity on the site, is 2995 BP, or around 3,000 years ago. Some artifacts found at the site suggest continued activity at the site into the early historic period, just prior to white settlement of the region. Conservatively speaking, there's evidence of continued human presence related to the stone structures at the site for a 2,500-year time. Detailed archaeological and architectural analysis of the structures suggests the site went through 5 cultural phases, each with its own distinct architecture. Rather than being built as a single large-scale construction project, the site evolved through multiple building episodes that expanded, modified, and upgraded it. A number of theories have been advanced in 70-plus years since the first systematic investigation of the site in the late 1930s. William Goodwin, the first investigator of the site, theorized it was built by Irish Culti monks around 1000 AD. Hugh O'Neill Henkin, a curator with Harvard's Peabody Museum, quickly countered Goodwin's argument by stating the site was built by Jonathan Patty, who lived on the property from 1825 until his death in 1849. Barry Fell, in his famous book America BC, argued the site was built between 800 and 600 BC by Goidelic Celtics. In recent years, the theory that the site was built by Native American peoples has gained credibility in the ongoing debate over the site. The Native American theory was formally published in Mary Gage's book, America's Stonehenge Deciphered. The proposed purposes for the site's construction are as varied as the theories of who built it. Interestingly enough, except for the arguments that the site was built by Jonathan Petit, all of the explanations for the purpose of the site have revolved around the concept of a place as a religious or ceremonial center. Serpent Mound is the largest surviving example of a prehistoric effigy mound in the world. Stretching 1,348 feet over the ground, the beautifully preserved ancient earthwork depicts the form of an undulating serpent with an oval shape at the head. Many groups of ancient American Indian cultures called the area of southern Ohio home for thousands of years prior to European contact, and vestiges of their sophisticated art and large-scale earthen creations remain. Unfortunately, many of our land's prehistoric earthworks have been lost in the recent centuries to development and agriculture, but Serpent Mound was spared this fate. Early excavations of portions of the Serpent Mound revealed no artifacts to help identify which ancient indigenous culture constructed this immense artwork. At least two different mound-building cultures were present at the site in succession over time. Three conical burial mounds can be found near Serpent Mound. Two of them belong to the Adena culture, 800 BC to 100 AD, and one to the Fort Ancient culture, 1000 to 1650 AD. A nearby village site evidences occupation by both the Adena and the later Fort Ancient cultures. The builders left no written records, so investigation and speculation continue on in both archaeological and less formal circles, attempting to explain the Serpent Mound's origins. The original purpose of the Serpent Mound remains a mystery. No record of explanation other than the earthwork itself has been discovered, and the historic oral traditions that might have connected us to the distant past have been highly interrupted. There are many theories as to what the earthwork could have been intended for. There's some evidence for astronomical correlations that suggest an earthly acknowledgement of cosmic celestial events. The nearby burial mounds and timelessly moving quality of the serpent's coils suggest it was once a site of sacred worship. The serpent motif has a connection to the cycles of birth, death, and nature in many cultures throughout the world. Modern visitors may enjoy contemplating the mysteries of our land's ancestors, feeling a connection to the past, and sensing of wonder at the scale of early people's physical and artistic accomplishments. Mystery rather than certainty remains the site's greatest gift to present generations, and all visitors are welcome to enter the circle of conjecture. Serpent Mound was known to native peoples and early settlers of Adams County for many years, but was brought to general attention in the 1840s by the famous pair who made a broad survey of Ohio's earthworks, Squire and Davis. In the 1880s, Massachusetts archaeologist Frederick Ward Putnam became interested in the site and noticed that it was being degraded by erosion and vandalism. He was able to raise the funds to purchase the land in the name of Harvard University, and it was dedicated as a public park. In 1900, the site was turned over to the Ohio Historical Society, which supervised the building of the observation tower overlooking the effigy, and later in the 1930s, the facilities and shelter house. Mesa Verde is a cultural area with an intense concentration of Pueblo population dating roughly from the 6th to the 12th centuries, with world-famous cliff dwellings being amongst the most notable uncovered remains. Researchers have discovered and recorded over 4,400 archaeological sites on the plateau that sits in southwest Colorado. Many of the abandoned dwellings have survived intact for hundreds of years, thanks to the dry landscape and being sheltered from the elements. Mesa Verde is widely recognized as the first archaeological site anywhere in the world to have received national park status. Today, it's a prominent place for visitors and for researchers trying to piece together North America's ancient past, and particularly of the Anastasi and Pueblo peoples who stand out among most other Native American peoples for their advances in urbanization. The Pueblo people originally settled Mesa Verde around the 6th century, and most of the buildings date between then and the 12th century. Extant remains suggest that settlement of the site could have begun as early as 12,000 years ago, and eventually those nomadic seasonal settlers moved to a basket weaving culture. They must have been attracted by the rock overhangs under which most of the houses now sit, because there is also evidence of semi-nomadic remains that predate the permanent settlement. The term Mesa Verde culture does not just refer to the areas where they settled, but also to their unique architecture and material style. This is as much a cultural landscape as it is an ecological one. From around the 6th century, we see evidence of widespread farming and a selection of settlement sites most conducive to agriculture. Clearly, permanent settlement was part of the plan at this point. Around the 12th to 13th century, the culture left the area, possibly due to environmental pressures such as drought. One of the key indicators of this collapse has come in the form of human remains and unusual nature of their death, suggesting both warfare and cannibalism in the final years. Both typical of societal collapse. We do know that some of these people moved later to sites in New Mexico and Arizona. The site became very quiet until it was signed into law as a national park in 1906. Several explorations took place between the mid-18th century and the late 19th century, and though no archaeological excavations took place, it's in the late 19th century the area acquired the name Mesa Verde. Interest through the 1870s led to calls for federal and/or state protection of the ruins and the cultural landscape. Calls for protection intensified through the 1890s, and finally it became a national park in the early part of the 20th century, the same year that the Federal Antiquities Act passed through Congress. From there, official excavations began, including the building of museums and measures to protect extant remains, the buildings, artifacts, and the cultural landscapes. Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site is in Illinois, just several miles east of the Mississippi River and St. Louis, Missouri. The mounds are a unique example of a large American Indian cultural and urban complex that flourished between AD 1000 and 1350. The original complex of mounds, homes, and farms covered over 4,000 acres. Population estimates for Cahokia proper now range from 10 to 20,000. If East St. Louis, and other surrounding sites are included, then a population of 40 to 50,000 is possible for Greater Cahokia. The site was once the largest indigenous urban center in what is now the United States, before the arrival of European explorers and settlers. Other large mounds were also located on the eastern and western sides of the river in what is now East St. Louis and St. Louis. However, most, if not all, these mounds have fallen in the past 300 years to development of these cities. The earthen mounds at Cahokia offer some of the most complex archaeological sites north of central Mexico. Monk's Mound, which dominates the World Heritage Site and is located near its center, is the largest man-made structure north of central Mexico. Monk's Mound measures 304 meters, 1,000 feet, by 213 meters, 700 feet, at its base, and covers 5.7 hectares, 14 acres, rising to approximately 100 feet in a series of 4 terraces. Cahokia Mounds was the regional center for the American Indian Mississippian culture, resembling a modern metropolis with its complex social system and large, permanent central towns. Cahokia Mounds World Heritage Site represents a truly unique example of the complex social and economic development of pre-contact indigenous Americans. One fascinating aspect of Cahokia is that a circle of wooden posts once stood about 1/2 mile west of Monk's Mound that aligned with the movements of the sun throughout the year. Archaeologist Warren Whittrey discovered this phenomenon in the 1960s after he identified a pattern of mysterious oval pits alignments with the posts. He determined that these posts appeared to predict the movement of the sun. He theorized that this served as a calendar. Upon further analysis, Whittrey realized that both the posts and Monk's Mound were shaped and placed in the exact spots necessary for the sun to look like it was rising from Monk's Mound itself when the equinox occurred. The Cahokia Mound State Historic Site Interpretive Center offers visitors orientation at its theater and exhibits. The Interpretive Center features recreations of life and architecture at Cahokia during its heyday, based on the theories and discoveries of historians and archaeologists. Giant figures known to archaeologists as intaglios, an American term which refers to an engraving art process, are located 15 miles north of Blythe on Highway 95. They're one of the few unsolved mysteries of modern archaeology, pieces of history preserved in the desert on a mesa of the Big Maria Mountains north of Blythe. Scientifically, they bear the name anthropomorphic geoglyphic. They've been more commonly called the Blythe Giants and are better known to locals as the intaglios. But the origin of the giant desert figures remains a mystery to visitors and scientists alike. The geoglyphic vary in form, style, and size, with the largest figure in the Blythe area, a man over 165 feet long, thought to be a giant hunter, being constructed like the other figures in the area through the removal of a surface layer of darkened rock, exposing a lighter soil underneath. The figures were fashioned by Indians, possibly thousands of years ago. Various Indians such as the Mojaves, Ames, Halchidomas, Quechans, and Maricopas inhabited the area, but no concrete evidence linking the figures to any group has been discovered. A variety of theories surround the origin and significance of the giant desert figures, which are best seen by air and were first discovered in 1930 by pilot George Palmer, who reported seeing a giant horse's tracks leading from the Colorado River to the mountains where the figures are located. Theories include religious lore and cultural expressions from the Indians, territorial markers, or astronomical graphics. But one author uses the giant figures, found nowhere else on the continent, as evidence for his theory that primitive man was at one time visited by highly intelligent beings from outer space. Eric von Daniken, in his A Chariot of the Gods and the movies that followed its release during the early 1970s, theorized that man was visited while the planet was relatively young and Homo sapiens were primitive. He claims that the giant desert figures can be seen only from the air, where the original calculations for the proportion geoglyphic were made and given to the Indians below, who followed the instructions in carving out the figures, scraping as deep as 6 inches into the rocky desert floor. He added that the figures can be seen from the ground, but make sense only when viewed from the air, and were possibly some sort of landing guide for the extraterrestrial visitors. Most intaglios were made by scraping the darkened rock on the desert floor to reveal a tan-colored soil beneath, and have weathered thousands of years of rain, wind, scorching desert sun, and most recently, off-road vehicles. The longest figure in the Blythe intaglios is nearly 167 feet long, and the only other similar figures in the desert have been found at Nazca, Peru, also mentioned in Van Daniken's book. Experts on a survey conducted that some of the figures may be prehistoric, while others were done after the Spanish introduced the horse to the area. About 1050 CE, Mississippian people were building a village at the Moundville site in west-central Alabama. The village had a well-planned mound plaza layout and a wall trench architecture. The Moundville residents produced shell-tempered pottery and had some degree of social rank differentiation. Moundville was built on a high terrace and was thus immune to flooding. It would eventually grow to contain 32 earthen mounds, 21 of which were truncated pyramids arranged around a single large quadrilateral plaza. Mound A measures 60 by 107 meters and is 6.7 meters high, and Mound B measures 59 by 107 meters and is 17.9 meters high. The mounds were built up in stages, somewhat like a layer cake fashion. There would be episodes of destruction in which the structure on top of the mound would be destroyed and burned. Then there would be a purification by the burial of the old surface. The continual rebuilding of the mounds was an expressive act, and mounds are an aspect of Mississippian expressive culture. Moundville was surrounded by numerous very small settlements without mounds, usually called farmsteads. In addition, there were about a dozen single mound sites in the area. These were probably elite residences subordinate to Moundville. About 1200 CE, a palisade was built around the ceremonial center of Moundville, and many people moved inside the walls. The population of the center at this time is estimated at 1,000. Moundville was a planned community and grew quickly after the palisade was erected. It eventually sprawled over 370 acres and included 20 mounds. The Indian people at Moundville were from two different social classes. The elite group made up about 5% of the population and was hereditary. The town was divided into distinct areas for settlement, mounds, and craft production. In addition, craftspeople were working with sheet copper, galena, and various kinds of pigments. The Indian people at Moundville were practicing head flattening at this time, resulting in what's known as elongated skulls. About 1250, the population of Moundville began to shrink as the outlying villages increased in size. However, the number of burials within Moundville increased and the town became a necropolis, a large cemetery controlled by the elites who lived on top of the mounds. Moundville residents acted as funeral directors. By about 1300, the population of the ceremonial center of Moundville declined further. Archaeologists have offered three possible reasons for the depopulation: a conscious decision to empty the center to enhance the sanctity of it, soil depletion and exhaustion of wood resources, and a lessening of the threat of attack with the population dispersing to unfortified towns. In 1400, two achondroplasia dwarfs, a male who was 50 inches tall and a female who was nearly 47 inches tall, were buried at Moundville. Both had elongated skulls. Both had been functional members of the society and were probably related. After 1400, many of the mounds at the necropolis of Moundville were abandoned and only a handful of people remained. Those who lived at Poverty Point more than 3,000 years ago left no written records of their day-to-day lives. We know that the site was a ceremonial center that was once home to hundreds or perhaps thousands of people, as well as a trading hub unmatched by any in North America at that time. Archaeologists have learned about these people by the materials they left behind, artifacts and archaeological features, as well as what they didn't leave behind, such as burials and crop remain. Burial mounds were common throughout the southeastern and central U.S., yet the absence of human remains at Poverty Point suggests these monumental earthworks built by hand were being used for other purposes. So was commerce. The site was once at the center of a huge trade network. 78 tons of rocks and minerals from up to 800 miles away were brought to Poverty Point, an area built on an elevated landform, Macon Ridge, that contained no stone of its own. Its people needed this raw material to craft into weapons, tools, and ceremonial items. This would have been impossible without help from faraway travelers or locals traveling by boat to collect rocks themselves. Poverty Point's centerpiece is its collection of earthworks built during a 600-year period, or what today would be considered 25 generations. Its concentrated half circles, measuring 4 to 6 feet high in places, have an outside diameter of 3/4 of a mile apart. Mound A, commonly known as the Bird Mound, is one of the largest in North America. Everything about the earthen structures at Poverty Point suggests a concerted effort to build a massive residential and ceremonial center that had no rival in terms of scale and size. There are a few uses for the mounds. Some are used for burials, some are used as platforms to elevate special buildings or temples. Others, such as shell mounds in Florida, are ancient trash heaps. Yet Poverty Point stands apart. With no human remains or heaps of shells, archaeologists assume that these were symbols of power and wealth. And here's a mystery for you. In a 43-acre plaza, defined by the earthen C-shaped ridges, are the remains of massive post holes that were set in circles dating up to 213 feet in diameter. An American version of Stonehenge? Much of what we know about Poverty Point comes from its diverse artifact collection. The intricate owl designs carved from red jasper stone and the ceramic human figurines are to this place. This tells us that art was important to these ancient people, and the images may have held spiritual significance. Pottery is not abundant at Poverty Point, but its people were among the first in the lower Mississippi Valley to make earthen vessels. They also made many other objects of fired earth or clay, such as Poverty Point objects and figurines. The question of why Poverty Point was abandoned remains unanswered. A subsequent American Indian group came along around 700 AD and reused a small part of the site, but otherwise it remained abandoned until its rediscovery in the 1800s. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, located in southwestern Pennsylvania, stands as one of the most published and most contested archaeological sites in the Americas. If not for the curiosity of a Washington County, PA farmer 6 decades ago, the oldest site of human habitation in North America might have never been discovered. In 1955, Albert Miller stumbled upon a groundhog hole on his family's farm in Avella and uncovered what looked to be a prehistoric tool. Miller chose to cover up the hole and carefully search for a professional archaeologist who could properly assess the historical significance of the site. Almost 2 decades later, in 1973, Miller finally connected with University of Pittsburgh anthropology professor Dr. James Adavasio, who visited the farm and looked at the object found near the groundhog hole. Astonished by the artifact, which was a prehistoric flint knife, Dr. Adavasio assembled a team of archaeology, anthropology, and geology students to study the area as part of a curriculum. The field school's excavation of the site over the next 6 years yielded nearly 2 million artifacts and ecofacts, including ancient stone tools, pottery fragments, and evidence of Ice Age fire pits. Further testing of the newly found artifacts concluded that the rock ledge overhang, naturally formed by the waters of Cross Creek, served as a campsite for prehistoric hunters and gatherers 16,000 years ago. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter provided shelter for visitors with nearby freshwater springs and sources of plants and animals for food. Meadowcroft holds the distinction of demonstrating the longest occupational sequence of humans in the Americas. The numerous occupational layers contain over 2,000 stone flakes and tools, 150 fire pits, and 1 million animal remains. A heavily cut and burnt deer antler base dated to 16,175 plus 95 years BP was the oldest bone found at the site. Artifacts from the lowest cultural layers include bifaces, unifacial knives, projectile points, and small prismatic blades. These small blades struck from a prepared core are not found at later Clovis sites. While most archaeologists agree that Meadowcroft was occupied by about 12,000 years BP, the earlier radiocarbon dates have come under heavy scrutiny. Some archaeologists suggest that the dating samples may have been contaminated by coal particles or by carbon dissolved in the groundwater. Number 10. Coral Castle. Whilst this place isn't ancient, it's worth a place in this documentary for its sheer mystery. How is it possible for a short, 100-pound sickly man, working alone and using only simple tools, to have quarried, cut, trimmed, and assembled over 3 million pounds of dense coral blocks to build a castle, and to have interlocked the stones with exacting precision, some weighing up to 30 tons, without the use of mortar? The builder's name was Edward Leedskalnin. The place is Coral Castle. Whenever Edward Leedskalnin was asked, "How did you build the castle?" he replied, "It's not difficult really, the secret is in knowing how." Edward Leedskalnin would go so far as saying that he could see beads of light on objects that he said were the physical presence of nature's magnetism. He explained that scientists have incorrect knowledge of atomic structure and electricity. He stated that all forms of existence are made up of three components: north and south poles and neutral particles of matter. He claimed to have rediscovered the laws of weight, measurement, and leverage. Edward Leedskalnin stated that these laws involved the relationship of the Earth to celestial alignments. Ed's brochures about his castle stated, "I've discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons." Edward Leedskalnin was a very private person. Nevertheless, some people have reported that they did glimpse him at work. One person claims to have seen the rocks move by themselves. Ed's neighbor stated that he saw Ed singing to the stones with his hands placed on the surface. A group of young witnesses claimed to see coral blocks floating through the air like hydrogen balloons. Some of the more incredible of his works was an obelisk monolith weighing nearly 30 tons, twice the weight of any stone in the Great Pyramid. At 40 feet tall, it was taller than the great monolith at Stonehenge. This he quarried and erected by himself. He also created rocking chairs weighing 3 tons that could be rocked with a finger. Perhaps the most spectacular of Ed's carvings is a huge 9-ton stone door through which he drilled an 8-foot longitudinal hole that was precisely aligned with the stone's center of gravity. Edward fitted the hole with a shaft resting on an automobile gear and then installed the door. The door fits within 1/4 of an inch of the walls on either side. The door is so perfectly balanced that it may be easily pushed open by a 5-year-old child using one finger. Today's engineers, using advanced laser and computer technology, would be hard-pressed to duplicate this phenomenal engineering feat. A local contractor was hired to cut a stone from Ed's quarry. Using a diamond-tip power saw and a 600-horsepower crane, the contractor had difficulty removing a smaller-sized stone. Also, the contractor could not extract the stone by cutting horizontally across the bottom of the stone, but had to break it away to extract it. Edward Leedskalnin cut his huge stones to create the 4 vertical sides, and he also cut horizontally across the bottoms to extract the stones. As this documentary shows, there were dozens of ancient American civilizations that flourished in their age.